Sure, sure.
Yeah. Good evening and a very warm welcome to all of you from the Department of History, Sri Shankaracharya University. It is indeed a moment of mixed emotions to be speaking to you at this moment. Proud to be presenting some very eminent speakers. Happy that we are gathered here as a collective dedicated to the pursuit of history, and sad that we are bidding farewell to two dear colleagues of the department. The National Conference on Critique and Construction Contemporary Writings on Histories of Keralam has been planned to showcase the research that has been done mostly in the past 2 decades that have significantly changed our perceptions about Kerala's pasts. Those of us who were here for the last international workshop on sensing the past, archival searches and thematic departures that we organized in October 2020 would recall that we were listening to some exceptional scholars who painstakingly paved the way for developing research, trotting new grounds, capturing data from least expected locations, and proclaiming that, yes, it was possible to make histories in more ways than one. We take up from where we left off then and explore a younger generation of scholars who have contributed exceptionally in widening the knowledge bases on histories of Kerala. We have one inspiring presentation from Tamil Nadu as well. Let me now welcome this gathering. At the outset, I welcome Dr.A. Paslithil, head of the department, and Dr. N.T. Narayanan, very dear colleagues and professors who will be retiring, but surely only professionally and not from our hearts. This conference has been organized as a sign of honoring their services in the department and to the discipline of history. Hearty welcome to both of you. The Registrar of the University, Dr. M.B. Gopalakrishnan, who is here. Welcome, sir. Participants are the strength of any conference, and I'm delighted to welcome all of you to this session of inspiring presentations and deliberations. I see a lot of familiar names from the last workshop and deem it an honor that you chose to be back with us again. A very warm welcome to all of you. This conference has been funded by the university, but made possible due to the coordination, commitment, and untiring efforts of the coordination team of faculty members, researchers, and postgraduate students of the department. I welcome them wholeheartedly to this conference. Our eminent speaker for the day, Dr. Mahmood Kooria, is here. A warm-hearted welcome to you for being with us, and we look forward to hearing from you soon. Thank you. I now invite the Registrar, Dr. M.B. Gopalakrishnan, to speak to us.
Respected Dr. Professor Michael Taragan, sir. Respected Dr. Mahmood Kooria. My dear friends, Dr. Sheba, Dr. Paslithil, Dr. Narayanan, dear colleagues, research scholars, and students. On behalf of Sri Shankaracharya Sanskrit University, once again, I welcome all the distinguished personalities. At the very outset, I would like to congratulate the Department of History and especially Dr. Sheba for arranging such an online 7-day national conference for honoring two of my colleagues. Indeed, most of us know that Dr. Paslithil and Dr. Narayanan MD, two committed teachers in history department, renowned researchers, and two persons with ample amount of social commitment. I am sure that such a kind of honoring will be of immense use to the academicians from history side throughout the country. I take this opportunity to personally thank Professor Michael Tarayan sir, former Vice Chancellor and the present Chairperson of Kerala Council for Historical Research, for inviting for accepting our invitation. And I am very happy to see that Dr. Mahmood Kooria has associated with Leiden University, Netherlands. Under the auspices of Kerala Council for Historical Research, our university is also planning to have a tie-up with Leiden University, Netherlands, under the Cosmos Malabar Coast project. So, in this occasion, I would like to congratulate all the teachers for arranging such a wonderful academic endeavor, and I am sure that this will be of useful to all the participants, all the academicians, and I once again thank everyone for giving me an opportunity to be a part of this academic endeavor. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Let me now invite Dr. Michael Thurgan to officially inaugurate the 7-day online national conference and speak a few words. Sir.
Thank you. Dr. Gopalakrishnan, respected Registrar of the Sri Shankaracharya University of Sanskrit Studies, Professor Paslithil, Professor Narayanan, Professor Shiba and other members of the faculty, research scholars and students, and also Mahmood Kooria, whose lecture we have all gathered here now, right now, to listen to. I'm extremely privileged to be invited to inaugurate such an august assembly for two reasons. One is that this conference is being held in honor of two of my fellow research scholars, historian scholars, A. Paslithil and M.T. Narayanan, whose work we all know. And this is a great occasion for me to express my personal regards and respect to their work, that both pedagogically as well as research-wise too. They have done great contribution to the field of the study of history. I am also privileged because at this advanced age, I'm being considered to be fit enough to be invited to such a conference, because this conference is meant to be an assembly of younger scholars who are trying to dismantle, question, revise some of the hypotheses and conceptualizations that some of us created in the past. In a way, I welcome that, I appreciate that. At the same time, that I'm also feel a bit proud that they chose me to inaugurate it. I would wish them all the best in the endeavor which they have taken up, because it's only by, as we all know, it's only by questioning, by challenging, by revising the existing scholarship would there be real progress in the act of creating new knowledge. And that is being done by these young scholars. And Mahmood Kooria, whom I've had the privilege of listening to at another occasion too, is a fine example of such persons who are already created a name for himself in his own field of study. The others whose names are listed are no less important. In fact, all of them, whether it be Ramdas or Jaishilan Raj, John Thomas or Justin Matthew, Jazeera, Kalpana Karunakaran, Deva Devan, Santosh Abraham, Burton Cletus, Varghese Vijay, Rachel Varghese, and they come from well-known institutes and universities all over the country, and some of them have also worked abroad. So such a combination of personages who have been already being taken very seriously by the fellow scholars is always an enjoyable occasion to listen to them. And I would congratulate the University of Khalidi University, and particularly Professor Shiba, for organizing this conference. I would like these kind of encounters to be continued also in our daily kind of engagement, because it is for us to prove to the world that history is no more the kind of subject that we used to learn earlier. Not that the earlier histories are all debunked or anything, but earlier histories, of course, opened up new paths and new ways for the people who came later to pursue, and also ask some new questions, because it is by asking these new questions that we've been able to also carve out new areas of studies, new areas of research, new areas of understanding too. So I would like this encounter not only over the generations, but also over different mental capacities and attitudes, and also on different positions. These encounters would be the staying power of the subject, not only of history, but of social sciences in general. And it is high time that all of us should work and look beyond narrow specificities of our so-called disciplines, and look at the world as it is, and it is a complex world with all kinds of relationships having existed and is existing even now. So I wish this conference all success, and I would take this opportunity to gladly declare that this national conference on critique and contemporary writings on history of Kerala officially or formally inaugurated. Thank you.
You're mute, Dr. Shiva.
I'm sorry. Thank you very much, sir, for your very insightful comments. We have come to the end of the brief inaugural session now. We shall get into the presentation for the day. The moderator for today is Avinash Simon, Research Scholar of the department. His research is on insurgencies, crimes, and incarcerations, the evolution of crime law and imprisonment in 19th and early 20th century Travancore. Over to you, Avinash Simon, for conducting the session. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Sheba ma'am. On behalf of the History Department of Sri Shankaracharya University, Kaldi, I would like to invite each and everyone to this national conference. Before we get on with the talk, allow me to read out few very important instructions. Please ensure that your mic is muted and the video is off throughout the lecture. Please ensure that you don't touch your phone accidentally, that you might activate the streaming option. Questions may be typed into the chat box during or at the end of the lecture. The moderator will raise the questions citing your name for the speaker to respond. So without further ado, I would like to invite one of our MPhil student, Mr. Jubair PM, for the official welcome. Over to you, Jubair.
Good evening, one and all. Today we have an eminent scholar who needs no introduction to the scholars of Indian Ocean world and Malabar. Still, let me introduce him before our audience. Dr. Mahmood Kooria is a research fellow at Leiden University and University of Bergen, and he is a visiting faculty at Ashoka University. He holds a PhD from Leiden University on circulation of Islamic legal ideas and texts across the Indian Ocean and Mediterranean worlds. His works include Laws in Circulation, Shafi'i texts across the Indian Ocean and the Mediterranean. He also edited volumes such as Islamic Law in the Indian Ocean worlds, Texts, Ideas and Practices, and Malabar in the Indian Ocean world, Cosmopolitanism in the Maritime Historical Region. We are very happy to have you here, Mahmood Kooria, and I welcome all of you to this first session. Now, let me invite Mr. Mahmood Kooria for his talk. Over to you, Dr. Kooria. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sheba and Professor Michael Taragan for having me. And it is a great privilege to talk in the first session of this series, which seems to be a very exciting series of speakers. I'm very privileged and humbled to be, first speaker in the series. I have to start by saying that I was like, I'm currently in Leiden in the Netherlands, and because of the time difference, I had thought that I have one more hour to prepare my talk. But until Dr. Sheba called me, then I realized that I am already, late to start. Anyway, it is also a great privilege that I get the opportunity to talk to you during the retirement of two eminent faculty members of the history department at Sanskrit University. I haven't had yet an opportunity to meet Dr. Paslithil and Dr. M.T. Narayanan, but I hope in near future our paths will cross sometime soon. So I'll come directly to my presentation, which is about two queens and the from the matrilineal household, which is like from the Arakkal family. Before starting this, I must say that I came to my area is not directly related to Arakkal family or 18th century Malabar. Scholars like Professor Michael Taragan, as well as very recently Dr. Abhilash Malail, and many other scholars have worked extensively on the history, economy, and politics of Malabar in the 18th century. So I came to this topic, 18th century Malabar, through a different route, that is through my interest in Marumakkatayam or matrilineal communities. And I have talked about matrilineal communities across the Indian Ocean world. Usually we tend to believe in Kerala that Marumakkatayam is very specific to Kerala. But once we know, or once we look at the larger picture, we immediately realize that it is not only specific to Kerala. Rather, it goes beyond, far and wide, across not only Asia, but across Africa as well. So Indian Ocean and Islam, these are two features, sort of unites these communities from Mozambique and Comoros in East Africa to some parts of Somalia and Tanzania, as well as in South Asia, of course Kerala, but also beyond Kerala, in Karnataka as well as Lakshadweep Islands and parts of Coromandel Coast in Tamil Nadu. And then also in Sri Lanka, at least in 3 districts of Sri Lanka, Akrai-Pattu and Battikula and one more district, as well as in Southeast Asia, the largest matrilineal or Marmakkatayam community is in Minangkabau in West Sumatra in Indonesia. And also in Negeri Sembilan of Malaysia, there are these matrilineal communities. So until now, scholars have not studied these connected histories or the connected, or shared histories of these matrilineal communities across these regions. So in the last few years, I have been trying to understand how and why and when, the sort of communications or exchanges between these communities might have existed, and how they might have come to share a history of matrilineal. Of course, once we know of the traditions or debates related to matrilineal or the origin of matrilineal, it's part of a long debate, right? From the mid 19th century onward, several German scholars, Swiss scholars, like starting with Bachhofen, as well as the American scholars, Louis Morgan, and then more prominently Engels, but also Karl Marx himself had written about matrilineal being, or matriarchy being, sort of a social system, or original social system, as Engels calls it, that existed in the family system that existed in the prehistoric communities. So, but that is a long debate. Whereas, to briefly touch upon, the existing literature, is that not many historians have worked on the history of matrilineal, especially among the living matrilineal communities. Kerala is an exception, and also the scholars who have worked on matrilineal, they mainly have worked on the 19th and 20th century. So very few scholars, especially among these Muslim matrilineal communities from Mozambique to Minangkabau, very few scholars have went beyond 1800 to see what are the histories of these living communities. So there is, on one hand, you have the, let's say, the prehistorical debates in the 19th century and early 20th century, and then continue. And on the other hand, you have the sort of very, you could say, a modern approach on the matrilineal as a modern institution, and the conflicts with the matrilineal and patrilineal, as well as the internal conflicts, and then the transformations within the family structure. In the context of Kerala, definitely we have some eminent historians such as Elankulam Kunjan and K.V. Padmanabha Menon, and many other scholars have written and also have hypothesized the origin of matrilineal in different ways. Elankulam particularly has written extensively on the origin of matrilineal, although his hypothesis or his conclusions have been challenged by Professor M.G.S. Narayanan. But still, he is one of the scholars, one of the few historians who have made attempts to study the pre-modern origins of the living matrilineal communities. But yet again, once we come to the Muslim community, we do not have much, knowledge of what is happening. And in that context, so that is where I come from, looking at, the histories of the matrilineal Muslim community, particularly in the context of Kerala, but also other parts. My interest, as I said, goes beyond. And once I looked into the debates related to this matrilineal, matriarchy, or matrilocality, matrifocality, you have several names related to, or several terminologies, recent terminologies. And if you go back to 19th and 20th century, there are many other terms, matriarchate or genocracy, all sort of different terms that are affiliated with this thing. So in the context of Kerala, what we have is, especially among the Muslim community, is the well-known case of the Arakkal BVs, right? Or the Ali Rajas of Kannanur, which is often identified as a classical example of the matrilineal community. But again, once we know, I will come to this particular aspect. It is very unfortunate that despite of a common notion that the matrilineal existed among the Muslim community, particularly among the Ali Rajas, no scholar, no historian has really looked into the role of women within the, especially like there are wide notions or wide, sort of passing or fleeting references on the woman. And this is not only because with the Kerala history. If you look at history at large, whether it's Indian history, South Asian history, Asian history, the history of women, as one author has put it, just escapes my name. Sorry, her name escapes my mind. She puts it like, visible history and invisible woman. So there is always, history is very much visible, but women or history of women are always invisible. So that case is not different for the case of the Arakkal Ali Rajas or the Kerala history at large itself. We know very few women, history, like, historical figures. There are mythical figures or, semi-historical figures. Through different forms of charidams and different folk songs, Nadan Pattas and folk songs. But we know very little of, like, less than 10 figures, possibly, we know within the larger traditions of, or larger histories of Kerala. So this is a humble exercise to explore that history. And also, I must say, before going to the actual details related to the Arakkal dynasty, that, like, recently, I think 2-3 years ago in the Journal of World History, there was a very interesting article by one scholar called Stephen Amell, who enlisted around 277 queens who ruled the Indian Ocean realm. So from East Africa, from Comoros until, like, the Minangkabau Achanese Sultanate between 14th century and 19th century. So in that article, which is a very interesting article, in order, where you can get a comprehensive idea, almost comprehensive, I must say, almost comprehensive idea of the female rulers that had ruled the Indian Ocean world. And interestingly, in the whole work, he doesn't refer at all to the Arakkal, neither the other known cases from Kerala. So, at the moment in his list, there are 277 queens or rulers female rulers who had ruled the Indian Ocean. But then the list, of course, is larger once we locate, for example, the Arakkal dynasty into the realm. So from there, I'll come to, so my interest in the, Arakkal dynasty is, and also in the 18th century Malabar, it comes from this interest in the matrilineal. And forgive me if I make any mistakes while I refer to the 18th century Malabar, while there are such esteemed scholars, as Professor Tharagan as well as Dr. Malayal are here. So if there are, so my interest more sort of like, comes from, how gender particularly, or how particularly the female rulers and religion and politics entangled in 18th century in the Arakkal dynasty. I would like to pick the story or the history of two female rulers who were very important. And before doing that, like as every history presentation should be, I should engage with the existing literature or the historiography. So the most important recent work on the Arakkal Ali Rajas are by Binu. We have extensively studied the Dutch East India Company archives in order to explore the the history of Ali Rajas. And unfortunately, this is a very important work, for not only whoever interested in the history of Ali Rajas, but in the entire 18th century, late 17th and early 18th century history of Malabar. This is an important work. And also this is one of the two works recent works that had extensively used the Dutch archives related to Kerala. Our registrar was mentioning, and also Professor Tharagan is also involved in the larger project to explore the, documents, Dutch documents related to Malabar as part of the Cosmos Malabaricus, in collaboration with Leiden University and many other Dutch partners. So in this work, unfortunately, Binu John Mailaparambil stops at 1723. And 5 years after 1723, possibly the first female ruler comes to the scenario in the Arakkal dynasty. And I will come to the names and details. And she is possibly, like, even though we have a common belief that Arakkal BVs have been there for a long time in the existing or in the available genealogy of the rulers, possibly the first ruler comes after the point, not this year that Binu ends his work, that is in 1723. So immediately after that, there is the first female ruler. So that is an important work. And then there is also an edited volume edited by Professors K.S. Matthew as well as Joy Workey, and came out also comparatively with an which has this volume particularly looks at Kannanur. I'm sorry for a blurry image, but then this is a volume dedicated for Kannur itself, and it also has, among several other contributions, chapters on Ali Rajas, including one by Binu John himself. And then in Kerala, one of the most known works on Ali Rajas are by is by K.K. Kurup, which he published in English first in 1975. This book, which is, I think now it is almost out of print, and but then it was translated, or loosely translated into Malayalam and was published, I think, a few years ago. And this work, the Malayalam work, unfortunately doesn't give citations, so you always have to depend on the, for a scholarly work, you have to depend on the English work so that you get like exact references. The interesting thing about the first one, if it is entirely dependent on the Dutch sources, or mostly dependent on the Dutch sources, this work is mostly dependent. Professor Kurup's work is dependent on the English records, mostly English factory records, but also other records. And even more important, or equally important work is one work based on Portuguese sources by Reverend historian, like a very respected historian, Genevieve Bouchon. Her work on the Mamale de Kannanur, or the Mamals of Kannanur, a work that came out the same year as Professor Kurup's work came out in 1975, published in Paris, and then she looks at, like, only the 20 years immediately after the Portuguese arrival. So she looks at the how, and this work has been was also translated into English and published, I think, almost 15 years after the French book came out. So in 1988, this book is also almost out of print. Unfortunately, it's not immediately available. So what I have been trying to do is, like, my French is very, I am not at all well versed. So, but still, like, given as the English text is not available, I still try to, try to make sense of the French work with whatever different techniques that one can depend on. So these are some of the important works that we have available on the Arakkal dynasty. And then there are, of course, there are various materials available on the, Arakkal dynasty. For example, in the Calicut Regional Archives, the archivist, former archivist, Dr. Majid Sir, who had, who had taken great efforts to conserve all the Arakkal dynasty or Arakkal family's documents, and then he collected and then he brought all these materials into the regional archives and now preserved in the archives. And then the one limitation with that archives is it is that most of this material come from mid 19th century onward, so slightly beyond sort of my area of interest, that is on the 18th century and particularly the female rulers on that. But then to give a brief overview, there are different from 19th century. Once we come to 19th century, there are different sort of materials, like the Arakkal family records itself is an extensive one, but also we have different photographs. This one from Wikimedia Commons, but all mainly taken by a German photographer who had come to Kerala in the mid 19th century. But you can see this very much male domain, right? And the photograph itself can be studied in its own gender perspective and racial perspective and so forth. And also different coins of the dynasty from this period, in this one, those who would read Arabic can see that they have given the date 1621. That is definitely incorrect. 1621. If they are giving the Hijra year, it should have been, or it could have been either 1261 or 1261 or 1221. Either way, there are multiple similar sources related to 19th century. So if it is 1261 or around that, it would be 19th century. And then there are this sort of charts or genealogical trees related to the in the and also it is based on the Musnad. This is also given in Kurup's book, and with slight variations. And here, I would like to take a minute to invite your attention. Here around 20. You can you see the number 20, right? Harabichi Kadaube Adiraja Bibi, right? And then another female ruler. So these are out of all this list of 36 people that stretches up to the late 20th century. This is the first time we see a woman ruling over or becoming the head of the family or the ruler in the dynasty. And immediately after her, so that is here you also have the date 1728. So she rules it for about, I'll come to the details, but this is a sort of interesting document. This is a Malayalam version. Both of these images are taken from the Arakkal Museum itself, now under the archaeology department in Kannur. And there also in the museum, also if you visit, if you have a chance, if you visit, you also come across this sort of images or the portraits of the rulers, and all of them are from the 20th century, and it is quite interesting to observe, sort of deep read these images to see the changes in the sartorial or changes in the cloth patterns as well as the appearances and the ornamentations and so forth. But unfortunately, we do not have a similar portrait of these two interesting figures that I am interested in. So that is the Ali Raja Bibi Harabichi Kadawubi. And then immediately after her, the second person, second queen, Ali Raja Bibi Junumabe. Junumabe first because there is after one ruler or one male ruler, there is another female ruler with the same name. And she, the second ruler or the second Junumabe or Junumabi, the names are quite intriguing to say the least. So she, the second Junumabe, she has ruled the region for almost 50 years or more than 40 years in the region. And, her reign or her period has witnessed some of the most tumultuous situations or tumultuous turns and ups and downs in the history of Malabar, in the history of Arakkal dynasty, in the history of Lakshadweep, because you have the British taking over the entire territory. Just before that, the Tipu Sultan, coming over several times to the region, and then also the French and then the Dutch and so forth. But equally interesting is these two first rulers, first female rulers, and we have very little sort of information on these two rulers. As I do history and as everyone. Every other historian who also does pre-modern history, you have to depend on in a great detail on this sort of fragmentary, small, minute details that you come across in the records in order to construct or reconstruct the history of women particularly. And even despite of both of them being rulers, still the sources are silent about, their specific, cultural, social, political, and sort of different, appearances or expressions. So their voice itself, but still, fortunately, we have the Dutch sources from the period as well as the English sources. And for the third or the second Junumabe, we also have the Arabic sources related to their reign. And as far as this is still a work in progress. So I am not saying conclusively, but still I'm sure there must be some Malayalam documents as well related to their reign. So on the basis of their reign, the first two, I'll come to the details, particularly what I'm interested in terms of politics. And there are two episodes that I would like to focus on. One, a letter by a British regent, and similarly, an oath-taking ceremony, not ceremony, an oath-taking procedure that had happened in the Congregational Mosque of Kannur during the Junumabe the First. And these are sort of spectacles in which we could identify where the gender, politics, religion sort of endangle one another. So in terms of Arabic sources, we have there's a great work by in this in a Portuguese account. In the Portuguese archives, there are accounts on the related to the Ali Rajas. And in the Portuguese archives, there are the Arabic materials, some of which have been published, some of which also, and one of this is a letter written in Cochin, which also refers to the, their encounter or their arrival in Kannur. And this is another one, which also, detail. It also has been translated into, of course, into Portuguese, and then eventually it is included in the English edition of Genevieve Bujon's work. So if you are interested, you can also read the entire translations in order to see. But then as I mentioned, these are mostly about the male rulers, not much about the female rulers. And still, once we read the materials, we can sort of understand. But then once we come to the reign of these two female rulers that I'm interested in, the Dutch is a very important phenomenon. Oh, sorry, important players. So the Anjango fort. I'm not going to the whole history of Dutch East India Company in the region, but like to mention it very briefly, they were trying their best to make their way in the pepper trade and in the spice trade of Malabar at large and in Kannur particularly. And they realized that they have not been successful, especially in negotiating with the Kolatiri Rajas as well as with the Nayagas that were coming from the Karnataka region, as well as the major competitor, that is the British East India English East India Company. So by the second and third decade of the 18th century, they sort of hand over the Kannur fort, Nanjango fort, Kannur fort to the Arakkal dynasty, and then they but still they collaborate with the Arakkal dynasty, especially against the English East India Company. And this is part of it. It's if you go to the fort, you can see a plaque, an inscription in the old Dutch, which is basically a commemoration of one of the persons who have died in the region. And this is it's a huge one. I put the second photo along with two of my friends. One is Shihabuddin Poithunkadav. So basically, I put them in order to see, in order to give an idea of how tall the whole inscription is. So this sort of this gives almost simultaneous or contemporaneous to the sort of rulers that I'm talking about. And then this period, right? Once we come to the Dutch archives, particularly, slightly after Binu John's work ends, once we come to the Dutch archives, these are the years, right? The database of the VOC documents. And then I have taken a screenshot of a few documents related to between the year 1730 to 1743. And just before and after these 2-3 years, so there's a interregnum or a sort of a gap. So between immediately after Harabichi Bibi takes over the rule, the kingdom, for almost 2 years, there is no immediate correspondences from the Dutch underkoopman, that is the term, or the Dutch under merchant who was posted in Kannur. But in 1730, he writes a letter, and then in the following years also he writes a letter, and that continues until 1743. And I'll come to some of these documents, and particularly in 1737, immediately. And 1737 is a very interesting period, because that is when, I gave in my title, two queens against a sea, right? So the sea is not only the Arabian Sea, but also a sea of political interest, or political players, actors are simultaneously competing or fighting one against another in the small locality of, in the adjacent areas of Kannur. So in 1736, 37, 38, of course, you have the Dutch on one side, and then you also have the English East India Company, which has been pressurizing the Ali Rajas or the Arakkal dynasty or the Biwis. Also, there were two other important players. One is the Nayagas from the Karnataka. And so this particular letter is related to that. When the Nayaga from the Karnataka, Kannara region, the Nayaga invasion coming, and then the Biwis or the Jinumabe first is collaborating with the Nayagas in order to fight against the English as well as the Kolatiris. Both of them were trying to, control the island town or the township of Dharmadam, but also the adjacent areas. And this was an ongoing debate. And in this ongoing process, and at that time, the under merchant, which is like a position in the Dutch East India Company, VOC's hierarchy of the merchants. So there is upper cookman, and then under cookman. So upper cookman often is invested or appointed in the places where they have better prospects of procuring commodities and so forth. So Kannur had mostly had an under cookman, so sort of a junior merchant who was in charge. So he's writing a letter in 1737, 21 March, to Cochin from Kannur to Cochin on the Canara migration, and then the Moors Bazaar. Moor is a particular term. Many of you would be familiar with that. Moor is a term often given by the Portuguese to designate the Muslims. So, and it comes from the Iberian Peninsula. So there he refers to the what is happening, this tumultuous or like a very stormy period or stormy year. And in this year itself also, I'll come to the British officer just 1 year, like a few months before that. So the earlier letter, if it was on 21st March, few months before that, there is a clash going on between, of course, there is a war going on, not a clash, a war going on between the Arakkal BV and then the English East India Company, where the Nayagas on the side of the Nayagas and the Dutch on the side of the Arakkal BV, and then the Kolathiri and the British on the other side. So in this letter, you see a very sort of heated exchange between the BV as well as the English chief in Tellicherry, where he particularly picks up the issue of gender and saying that I'm not reading the entire thing, but I was here, what I highlighted here. I was willing to attribute, all these, things that, or all these offenses you are making against us, to the weakness of your sex, your gender. Yet, if in future you continue in the same evil practices, I shall no longer make these favorable allowances, but proceed for compelling you to desist. And then, in response, BV writes particularly, that is like in a very short letter. It would be interesting to locate the original source itself, whether it's written. What we have is what I managed to get so far is only the translation. But the original letter itself, if we get the Ola, whether in Malayalam, I believe it must have been Malayalam or in English. The English version says it's a translation of the Ola. Therefore, it would be interesting to know what exactly the BV is saying. In the translation, the British often, and it is a well-known case, right? They not necessarily translated what actually was conveyed, but they translated what they wanted to hear. So here in this letter, in the response, which I haven't copied here, but we see, we see the instance where the BV is sort of apologizing, for for arguably conveying the image. And there in the, by 1737, this year, during that apology, the British chief asks the BV to make a public apology at the in the Congregational Mosque of Kannur, or the Jumat Palli of Kannur. So, and what is interesting is that the British is asking not the Queen itself, but the husband of the Queen, which is interesting. And this is Logan is mentioning about it. He's writing about this, and also William Logan, and also Kaken Kurup is also has written in a small passage about this in the work. But it is a intriguing, a very interesting episode. Why the husband should apologize, and also why it should be at the mosque. So it's not like, my assumption is that it is not very much to do with the idea of the sacrality or the or taking an oath at the mosque. And the apology come oath is that it should be that the queen, the BV, has not done anything wrong against the British, and that should be the statement or the testimony that the husband has to take on behalf of the BV at the mosque. And this is a moment, although we don't have, maybe I'm still exploring to see the various nuances or various gradations or different shades of this gray, to see the how religion and politics, and as well as gender itself comes to play. And as we saw, as we see in this particular case, and also in a series of English East India Company records, letters, whenever they refer to male rulers, they always call him as a male Arakkal ruler. They always call him Adiraja or Ali Raja. Whereas for the female rulers, they always use the term heiress, or one who comes almost like giving a sense of temporality or temporal notion, that the ruler, she is not an actual ruler, but coming for a short time. And this is happening immediately in 1728 itself, when the first first female ruler, Harabichi herself, takes over, and then it continues. And in this point, when they ask for an apology by the husband, they sought, they sort of sought the authority of a male member, taking that having an advantage over a female person taking oath. And also, but also we can take it, we can read it from other dimensions also possibly, because we know from other sources that women in Kannur were not necessarily distanced from the mosque, and the women were and did, and they even constructed mosques, but also they did go to mosques. And even the Kannur Kannur BVs were often the topmost judges of all the qadis or the religious judges. They were often identified as the Qadil Qudat, or the chief justice of the judges. So her and she was in charge of her all these religious clerics that were functioning in the region. And then many of them did go to mosques. And we have for slightly later period, from the second Janubabe, or the second or the third queen in this series, we have this fascinating letter from the Ottoman Empire. And this where this portion where it is underlined, right here, it refers the whole question at that time seems to be in the 18th century, when a Muslim woman takes the position as a ruler. That seems to have become a controversial issue. So in the 1780, around 1780, you have this interesting letter by the Ottoman Sultan of that period, arguably writing. Particularly if you look at this portion, it says that we came to know about the death of your brother, Akhikun al Marhum al Hakim. So your brother was passed away, and therefore, according to the local customs, we have taken over the power, and we recognize you. And it's a 2-page letter, on both sides, where they say that according to the local custom, you have taken over the power, and therefore we recognize you as a legitimate ruler, and we also give command, or give a command to the British ambassador who is stationed here in Istanbul or Constantinople, to recognize you as an equal partner. So this in this episode also we see basically this sort of maybe Professor G. Arunimi has written extensively on the Victorian idea of family, as well as the gender roles within the family, especially the headship. Always being invested into the male members alone. So for many British officers, it didn't make also, which is not very different in 18th century also, where a woman being the head of the family and in charge of the administration, and therefore they sort of try to undercut it in different ways. As I just explained in the case of this oath-taking ceremony at the congregation at the Jumat Palli of Kannur. Similarly, in this case also, here you see an Ottoman Sultan during the third Sultana, or third female ruler. The Ottoman Sultan himself sort of writing a letter legitimizing and also writing about the British ambassador or recommending the positionality or the legitimacy of this person, of the female ruler, in order to recognize her as an equal partner. And what is interesting is that in this particular letter, at the beginning of this letter, it refers to two ambassadors who had gone from Kannur, from Arakkal dynasty, to Istanbul. They mention in the letter, they mention the names of the people as well. So there we can definitely see that, within the domain, the female ruler or the headship of the Muslim woman was not necessarily challenged, because the epithets given to these ambassadors look to be they sound to be more prestigious or more within sort of umara and ulama, or more both religious as well as communal leaders. And for these religious and communal leaders to carry out a mission to Istanbul from Kannur in the 18th century, seeking legitimacy for their female ruler, and also requesting the British, the Sultan himself is requesting to support the ruler, is something interesting. I think I'll stop it here. I don't have an immediate conclusion, but I'll just say that something that I'm still exploring is to see this dynamics of gender. When you have a female ruler for first time, or three female rulers, and you could see in a way the whole 18th century, almost the whole of 18th century, except for few decades, maybe 3 decades, the entire realm of Arakkal dynasty is ruled by these 3 eminent rulers. And this is an attempt, an humble attempt to locate the voices of these rulers whose voices or whose stories have not yet been fully acknowledged. I think I'll stop it here, and then I'll take it from here if depending on the question.
Thank you, Dr. Kooria, for such an intriguing and exciting topic. I'm sure we all received a new insight into the matriarchal history of Arakkal dynasty, especially in relation to the Arakkal Biwis. And thank you, sir, for introducing important books and documents related to Arakkal dynasty to the young scholars who are present here. I think it's time for us to go on with the question answer section. Shall I go on with the questions, sir?
Sure.
So the first question is by Santosh Ilayadath. The question is how far it is plausible to address a matrilineal king group's titular head as queen in the pre-modern context of Kerala.
I don't really understand the question. Is it about the epithet?
No, it's how far is it possible to address a matrilineal king group's titular head as queen in the context of Kerala?
Okay. Which is an interesting question, but it would be like, at this point, this is something that I was briefly mentioning, or at least, in passing I was mentioning about, the names ascribed or given to these people, right? The names are immediately, not resonant with the later names. From the 19th century, we have other names that are sort of relatable with the, Arabic or Persian words. Whereas these words are sort of like, of course, these names will have their own etymologies, but still, like, something that stands in this context. I am not in a position to comment about, like, for example, the Anjango, Queens of Anjango, which was also at this time very important in late 17th and early 20th century. Late 17th and early 18th century, the queens there. So I don't know what exactly were the titular roles and titular titles that were given to them as in terms of queen. So the appearance of BV, itself, and also the in the contemporary sources, recent sources, people tend to identify with the, like, sultana and, and so forth, which I don't think are immediately evident in the sources for this period from 19th century. Like, for example, if you look at the inscription that I didn't discuss at the end, but maybe I'll show you. There you have, like, the people being addressed, or, like, in the inscription they are being given addressed as BV, right? You see, Adiraja BV, Avargala Sahayathal, Uppil Maria Umma BV. So BV could be, and oh, I don't know whether, did you manage to see it, or is it still being screened? Yeah, anyway. So that is generally the complex picture, but still I would say, Santosh sir, that we need to explore further.
Thank you. The next question is from Jubair. The question is, how much influential and influenced is the position or title of Arakkal Bibi in postmodern North Malabar's Islamic scholars?
Pre-modern, not Malabasis.
Yeah, in the pre-modern context, right?
Pre-modern.
Yeah, exactly. This is the sort of research that I am exploring to see, how exactly they were influential. From 19th century, like, if you identify it as a modern period, then we have a lot of various nuanced, complex pictures. Once we come to the 18th century, this sort of letter, or, these letters are venues where we can explore possible avenues in which the BVs themselves were establishing them. So, and also many other realms, like, so here it's mostly about the politics, but also they were, like, as I was briefly mentioning about the position of the Qadi, right, and the appointment of various Qadis, and then commanding over all the religious judges or religious scholars, and then having the final say within, even having a final say in the religious matters, and many other realms, and also the establishments of the mosques and the, the positions such as mutawallis, or the managerial positions of the or administrative positions of the religious institutions, and so forth. So there are multiple venues where we can see where the Arakkal BVs themselves must have been influential in the period.
Thank you.
Yeah, Dr. Mahmood, are there parallels that you see on the African coast?
Definitely. Yeah. So two realms which are very important. One is the Comoros. There in Comoros itself, there are two important dynasties entirely ruled by women. Not entirely, but at least, like, similar. So it relates to the whole idea of matrilineal inheritance, matrilineal succession, right? So in Moheli, there are these queens from the late 18th century and then the 19th century, and then also some of them continue. In Moheli and also in Angoshe in Mozambique, there are also these similar realms. And also what is interesting is that, like, you know, I came across a series of letters they had written. And if you know, yeah, we know that in Mozambique was under the Portuguese rule, right? So they were writing several letters in Arabic script, although they were using the local language similar to the Arabic Malayalam tradition in Kerala. So they were writing in Makua, or the local language, but using the Arabic script about different nuances. And there, like, you know, we have direct voices of the female rulers from the region, from Angoshe, Cabo Delgado, as well as the Moheli. Moheli was with the French, while the Mozambique was with the Portuguese. Yeah. So there are parallels, and also all other institutions, you know, sort of are comparable. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. One other question is, you know, there are two things. One is the coming of modernity and the rule of men and patriarchy in that sense. Two, the question of Islam, now, which doesn't, you know, in the stereotypical frame within Islam is not of matrilineal. So how do these, you know, instances both along the African coast and in Arakkal, you know, how are these negotiations happening? One with Islam and one with colonial modernity of, you know, having male-headed households.
Yeah, true. I would say both of them. If you think of it, like, it depends on from which angle we would like to look at these conundrums or the processes. So by the 19th century, when the both you know, colonialism as well as the both Arabian as well as the European migrations to these places become intensive. Then, you know, both the Arabian as well as the European entities or personalities are on the same page in fighting against the matrilineal households, and also fighting against the institution. So there isn't much difference between, like, you know, whether you are an Arab or European, or whether you are a colonizer, or whether you are a Islamic preacher, Arabic preacher coming from the region. Whereas, like, you know, if we look at like a time before that, once we see, you know, the local accounts, and this is like, you know, we have the plethora of these local accounts from the Minangkabau context from Indonesia, where unlike, you know, unfortunately, I'm still trying to explore, you know, maybe in the Kerala context as well, we have similar accounts where the local ulama or local Muslim scholars, as well as, you know, leaders, are equally supporting, as well as, you know, they're taking benefits. And even, like, you know, if you look at the institution of the Qadi, for example, whether including Ponnani itself, which is otherwise a heartland of patriarchy or patriarchal interpretations of the religion, their headship or the Qadiship was often inherited or transferred through matrilineal or matrilineal lineage, right? So it would go to nephews instead of sons. So the religious scholars themselves were beneficiaries of the matrilineal system that were existing. And it sort of continued in some of these institutions, despite of the criticisms that had come, whether from the European or the Arab preachers that were coming at that time. Yeah. So I would say, like, you know, it was sort of controversial for the people who were coming from outside, and it wasn't necessarily that controversial for the people. So in that sense, like, a different form of Islam, as well as the entire forms of modernity was very much patriarchal into these realms. And of course, it ended up in it didn't go very smoothly. Often it led to intensive conflicts, actual wars, and so forth.
Thank you. The next question is from Abubakar Siddiq. What was the nature of ulema institution in Kannur during this period? How Islamic legal school responded on the authority of you?
Okay, nature of ulama institution during this period. Once you talk about, like, if it is about 18th century, of course, like, Kannur is often marginalized in the narratives related to the Islamic learning in the region. So, for example, if you look at Binu John's work, I have great admiration to the work, but still he says that Kannur was not necessarily a center of Islamic learning, and he sort of asserts that into the position of matrilineal and so forth. But the Bukhari Sayyids or the Bukhari Qabila or the Bukhari scholars, who had supposedly or arguably came from Central Asia, Bukhara, in the 16th century. So 1510, 1520s, they had come and then they had settled in Kannur, and then eventually went to different places. And the first member in this particular family of the scholars, they claim, they claim lineage from the Prophet. But they were often contested, or their claim was often contested within the community as well as beyond. So they asserted their religious authority not only on the basis of their genealogical claim going back to the Prophet, but also through their religious authority. So they were very well versed in Islamic sciences, Islamic studies, and so forth. So they are one example, or these people are one example of influential ulama that were functioning out of Kannur in the period in 16th century, and we have that continuation coming up to 18th century, and then later on also in the immediate vicinities of Kannur, whether it's in Valapattanam or Erimala or these places, and Srikandapuram. All these places were heartlands of Islamic learning and Islamic institutions, and it goes before 16th century as well as after 18th century, 16th and 18th centuries. So, for example, Ibn Battuta talks about this sort of including a lot of women studying in the Quranic schools in the Erimala region. So definitely it was a very influential place, so to speak, for Islamic learning at least. What time is it in India? Sorry for this random question.
Sir, it is 7:20 p.m.
Okay, all right. Yeah, that's fine.
Shall I go on with the next question?
Yeah, I can take a couple of more questions because I have to attend one. I have to give another.
Oh, okay. Okay, sir.
I can.
The next question.
Yeah, if it is in the chat box, I can read them out. Right.
Yeah, it's there in the chat. Safwana Salam.
Is there?
Yeah.
Safwana Salam, sir.
Let's see. I see one from Meenu and Lakshmi, but then before that.
Sorry, it's before that. It might be easier for you if I read it out, maybe.
All right. Okay, please go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, sir. The next question is from Safana Salam.
Yeah.
Her question is, what do you think about the absence of Arakkal babies before the 18th century? Because a matrilineal custom of inheritance existed even before that.
Very, very interesting question. I don't have a clear answer to that. It is interesting, and it is something that I also have been thinking about it, right, out of the whole lineage. these are the first rulers, right? In 1728, the female rulers coming up, showing up in the sources. So I don't know yet why, you know, and so it sort of relates to the whole question of matrilineal itself, right? And you know, or the matrilineal or Marimakatayam practices in the region. And it would be interesting. Like, if any of you have any suggestions, I would be happy to hear. And I'll be very grateful to hear your thoughts on that later on. Yeah. Okay. Now I see another question from Imran Ahmed, right after Safwana.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Is there a ruler face problem being female like Razia face in Delhi Sultanate? Okay. You can sort of identify similar issues, like for example, this, you know, in the case of, you know, the Jinumabi II, why you need a legitimation from the Ottoman Sultan, right? Is it like, you know, is it because of the internal conflicts within the Muslim community or within the realm, or is it very much related to the British who were trying to create a lot of problems? And from the letter, the second part of the letter, immediately what becomes clear is that, you know, it was mainly addressed to the British, so it was sort of an external issue. But it also could be that there were issues within the, you know, community, and that is why, like, you know, they were seeking support from a Muslim ruler, you know, so to speak, instead of going, like, you know, to any other powerful ruler, such as, like, let's say Zamorin or, you know, any other ruler who might be able to support them in the realm. Yeah. By late 18th century, of course, Zamorins were almost irrelevant. But any other ruler, instead of going to anyone else, why should they go? So it could be, you know, something to address within the, like, you know, some of the problems within the Muslim community. But these areas are, you know, either we need to read the sources more closely in order to see the nuances of that sort of issues, like, you know, and comparing and connecting with, you know, some. For Razia Sultana, of course, we have you know, quite a number of secondary sources as well as primary sources compared to these rulers, about whom, as I mentioned, despite of having a lot of works, both popular as well as academic works, you know, no one has really paid attention to them. You know, even their names, they, you know, we see their names in the chronologies, but, like, you know, no one really explored what their history is, despite of them ruling, like one of them ruling almost for, like, you know, 4 decades or more than 4 decades. So it is definitely important. Yeah. Okay, so shall I take the last question from Minu? Yeah.
Okay, so actually there is one question from Minu and Lakshmi Chandran. If you could kindly answer those 2 questions.
Okay, all right.
Yes, thanks.
As a Swarupam, definitely, how do you comment on this?
Should I read it out, sir? Oh.
No, it's fine. So yeah, the question is basically how I affiliate, you know, Arakal, like Binu Jones' identification of Swarup, of Arakal dynasty as a Swarupam, and the second one is about is Arakal Swarupam house family can be perceived as houses by the sea. Definitely, I agree. I don't have a, like, I am not making a larger claim on the, you know, on the power or the, you know, extensive uses of the power, or not asserting a lot of power to these rulers. But still, one thing that we need to address in the case of these rulers, particularly, you know, in the 18th century and also before, they go beyond, you know, similar Swarupams that were existing in the region, right? Whether, like, you know, there are multiple Swarupams that were existing. And in the Arakal dynasty, particularly during these areas, this is an area that I didn't touch in the lecture, they were extending or they were influencing and also taking over not only Lakshadweep but also Maldives as well as other regions. So they had direct control of that went beyond the usual Swarupams. And therefore, I think it would be better, sort of to go beyond the, and Swarupam, as we all know, it's sort of it has a particular connotations in Kerala history context. So in order to take a larger context and also, going beyond this limited identification of, mercantile house or prominent mercantile houses along the sea who are ruling over, there should be more appreciation of this breadth of the power that these Arakkal rulers were trying to assert within Malabar and also beyond into Lakshadweep as well as Maldives. And Maldives, Binu himself talks about it in detail, some of the encounters related to Maldives. But also in the 18th century, this is a period where they take control of some of the islands directly more than ever before. Yeah. Okay, and then I'll take this last question from Lakshmi.
Lakshmi, yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay, there was another question from as well, but I'll.
You may conclude.
Yeah.
Yes.
So from Lakshmi Chandran, do you think the emphasis given to the factors like Victorian morality and colonial intervention downplayed the influence of Brahmanical ideology in the transformation of matrilineal societies in Kerala? Of course not. Professor Arunima's work on Victorian morality, she doesn't, only talk about the Victorian or the colonial intervention into the region, but is also equal attention she's giving to the Brahmanical ideas and how basically the colonial officers as well as the local members from the matrilineal households themselves were adapting a lot of Brahmanical Shastras. So it's not only about the Victorian morality or colonial intervention, but it is also about sort of Brahmanization of the matrilineal house system, matrilineal system that were happening in the region. And this is her fascinating study. There comes Papa talks about this in detail, the simultaneous Brahmanization as well as the colonization, transforming the matrilineal societies. So it's not downplaying the Brahmanical ideology. Yeah. Shall we stop here?
All right. Yes. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, for patiently answering all the questions despite your busy schedule. Now, quickly, to officially conclude the session, I would like to invite our MPhil student, Mr. Abdul Muhiz, to present the word of thanks. Over to you, Muhiz.
Doing everybody. In the occasion, immense pleasure to this opportunity to post a lot of time. Eminent young student from Kooria, Department of History, Sri Lanka University. If you have personal activity, thank you, Dr. Mahmood, for remarkable patience here, especially for years. I would like to extend my to Dr. Dragan. I also express my deep regards to Balakrishnan. Also, I deem it a great pleasure.
Like a coded message.
Dr. M. Shiba, her taking efforts to arrange and my association and participants. In fact, how that personal session. Finally, thanks you all once again.
Shibama, if you may.
Yes, thank you. Thank you all. Thank you, Dr. Mahmood Kooria, for being with us and starting this conference off with your presentation. Thank you so much.
No, thank you too for putting this
Yes.
together.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all for being here. We'll meet again day after tomorrow.